Trading goods. Trading goods. Trading goods. Silk Road, yeah, Silk Road, yeah. 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 Silk Road, yeah, Silk Road, yeah.
All right, welcome back. In this video, we will be focusing on the trans-regional trade networks that first formed back in period 2, the classical age, from 600 BCE to 600 CE, and then expanded and grew during the age of trans-regional interactions, period 3, from 600 CE to 1450 CE. This video will focus mainly on the Silk Road. So the big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are: first, what motivates trade? Second, besides goods, what else was exchanged along trans-regional trade routes? Third, what kinds of goods were traded on the Silk Road? Fourth, what impact did pastoral nomadic people and civilizations and empires have on Silk Road trade respectively? And fifth, what aspects of the Silk Road changed over time and what stayed the same? So what motivates people to trade? Really, trade is motivated by the unequal distribution of resources worldwide. Here we can see a modern day map of every country and their main export, and you can see how diversified the various natural resources that exist in the world are. And so we see trade networks forming in regions where there's a lot of diverse geography. So for example, in West Africa and North Africa here. In North Africa, there is the Sahara Desert. And then in West Africa here, there's grasslands and forests. And so a very different kind of geographic region is going to lead to a trade zone forming, the Trans-Saharan Trade Network between North and West Africa, because they have very different natural resources and they want to be able to exchange them. Trade also allows for people to gain those rare commodities, those rare items, which gives them increased social standing and status in their society, right? Everyone wants to have those amazing luxury goods that nobody else has as a sign of their social standing. Besides goods, what else was exchanged along trans-regional trade networks? So, trans-regional trade networks formed, as I mentioned before, during the classical age from 600 BCE to 600 CE. But then they increased in their size and intensity from 600 to 1450 CE. The age of trans-regional interactions is what we call it. And these included the Silk Road, the Indian Ocean sea lanes, and the Trans-Saharan trade routes, and we'll do a video on each of these. Now, trade in each of these cases is not only going to lead to the spread of goods, it's also going to lead to the spread of religion, for instance, Buddhism and Islam and Christianity along the Silk Road, or Islam along the Indian Ocean sea lanes and the Trans-Saharan trade network. It leads to the spread of technology, such as the compass, the astrolabe, paper, gunpowder, all those various technologies that are being developed during this period are eventually going to spread along these trans-regional trade networks. It's going to lead to the spread of plants like sugarcane, which spread across Dar al-Islam, this unified Islamic trade zone. It leads to the spread of animals. We'll discuss how dromedary camels, originally domesticated in the Middle East, are brought to North Africa and the role that they then play in traversing the Sahara Desert. But it also leads to the spread of diseases like smallpox, the measles, the plague, diseases that are going to have huge demographic impacts. So let's start by examining the Silk Road. Oh, I think I just got a little sick. I think I just vomited in my mouth whenever I see historically inaccurate pictures like this. So what's wrong with this image? So this is a map showing the Silk Road, and what's wrong with it is it suggests to the audience that there's only one single road spanning Eurasia. It's a big time fail. The Silk Road was an overland network of trade routes crossing Europe and Asia. There weren't actual roads, but they were routes that were commonly used by merchants and nomadic peoples, and ultimately their animals would beat down a path back in the classical age, it's going to connect the Roman Empire with the Han Dynasty in China. Later in period 3, it's going to connect the Sassanids, the Byzantines, the Song in China. It's going to connect the Islamic Empire and the Tang Dynasty in China. It's going to ultimately span nearly the entire Mongol Empire, this massive, huge land empire in the 1300s. So it connected civilization empires like the Romans, the Chinese, the Islamic, the Persians, the Byzantines, the Mongols, but it also connected these pastoral nomadic peoples who were mainly living in the drier regions of Central Asia. So what kind of goods were traded along the Silk Road? Can we make some generalizations? So because these goods were traded over land, that's really critically important to understand. People were not going to carry these goods on their back. They were being transported by domesticated pack animals, camel and horses and ox. And so the goods like spices or silks or porcelain tended to be smaller, lighter weight luxury items, right? Goods that would sell for a high price, but that were lightweight and that were small and easier to transport because you're transporting them on the backs of pack animals. Now this was a relay trade, so you didn't have like Roman merchants going all the way to China to trade their goods. Instead, it was a relay, so these goods would be passed down from one trading market to the next. Ultimately, these goods would be changed hands many times before reaching their destination. So what impact did civilizations or empires and pastoral nomadic peoples have on the Silk Road trade? So when we think about these various empires, they facilitated trade by unifying regions, and one of the big challenges on the Silk Road was theft. And so what an empire did was it provided security for these various merchants who were crossing the Silk Road. And so trade is going to increase on the Silk Road during periods of large, powerful empires like the Mongol Empire. We'll talk about the Pax Mongolica or the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, ultimately because the empires provided greater security for merchants. Now, pastoral nomadic peoples, these people living in between these areas of civilization, are going to play a critical role in moving trade, especially in various parts of Inner Asia. There are these large deserts, very dry, arid regions or grasslands, and these pastoral nomadic people who were already used to traveling around because they were nomadic and already had pack animals like camels and horses that they relied upon, they became excellent carriers of the goods. So we call them the truck drivers of world history. They are going to be the ones moving goods from one market to the next in many cases. One of the groups that is going to transform over time, they initially started out as pastoral peoples, but eventually they're going to settle down and form their own kingdom, are known as the Sogdians. And the Sogdians were Central Asian merchants, and they set up diasporic communities all along the Silk Road. So they had a very centralized spot. One of the major trading hubs was Samarkand, which was right here in the center of the Silk Road trade network. And so the Sogdian merchants could be found as far away as China. So this is a Chinese image showing a blue-eyed, red-haired merchant who happened to be from this region of Central Asia. So what aspects of the Silk Road changed over time and what stayed the same? Whenever you're dealing with a CCOT question, oftentimes, especially when we're dealing with change, it's good to start thinking about technological changes. So new technologies like the yoke, the saddle, which were developed during period 2, are going to allow domesticated pack animals to transport goods longer distances. And then over time in period 3, they're going to develop more improved saddles like the camel saddle, which is going to allow them to pack even more goods on to these pack animals. The yoke, which is important for connecting animals to a cart, was very useful along the Silk Road to move goods from one market to the next. So these new technologies are one of the major transformations or changes that occurred throughout period 2 and then into period 3. Now, one of the things that stayed the same on the Silk Road was the fact that there was always this constant fear about goods being stolen. And so these caravansaries, these inns, were built to provide rest and protection for merchants. So here we can see one in Oasis Town. I believe this is in China. Here we see some of these caravansaries, and notice the high walls, right, and the turrets, which were used for protection. And so these caravansaries came into existence along trade networks like the Silk Road to provide rest and protection for merchants. Now, diseases are also going to spread along the Silk Road, which are going to lead to the collapse of various classical civilizations, the Roman and the Han we've discussed before, and also Middle Age societies. We'll talk about the spread of the bubonic plague. And so that explains this population dip right here that we have around 1340. The unlucky 1300s is where you see the major outbreak of the bubonic plague. And so you should be aware of that dip. Whenever we're talking about the 1300s, unlucky 1300s, you should be aware of the demographic impact that happened as a result of trade. Urban areas were hit especially hard. We'll come back to this again when we start talking about the plague. Smallpox, the measles, the bubonic plague are all diseases that would spread along the Silk Road. And the long-term effect of this, though, was that it ultimately allowed Eurasian people to gain immunity from these diseases. Those that survived had natural built-up immunity to these diseases. And this immunity is going to become critically important when Europeans are going to go over to the Americas and bring diseases with them, and the Native Americans are not going to have those built-up immunities, mainly because they hadn't had exposure to those same domesticated animals which initially transmitted those diseases to Europeans. So as a result of watching this video, you should be able to answer these 5 big questions. First, what motivates trade? Second, besides goods, what else was exchanged along trans-regional trade networks? Third, what kind of goods were traded on the Silk Road? Fourth, what impact did pastoral nomads and civilizations and empires have on Silk Road trade? And then fifth, what aspects of the Silk Road changed over time and what stayed the same? Thanks for watching. 1850 CE. This video will focus mainly on the Silk Road. So the big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are: first, what motivates trade? Second, besides goods, what else was exchanged along trans-regional trade routes? Third, what kinds of goods? Really, trade is motivated by the unequal distribution of resources worldwide. Here we can see a modern day map of every country and their main export, and you can see how diversified the various natural resources that exist in the world were traded on the Silk Road. Fourth, what impact did pastoral nomadic people and civilizations and empires have on Silk Road trade respectively? And fifth, what aspects of the Silk Road changed over time and what stayed the same? So what motivates people to trade? All right, welcome back. In this video, we will be focusing on the trans-regional trade networks that first formed back in period 2, the classical age, from 600 BCE to 600 CE, and then expanded and grew during the age of trans-regional interactions, period 3, from 600 CE to 4.
Trading goods. Trading goods. Trading goods. Silk Road, yeah, Silk Road, yeah. 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 Silk Road, yeah, Silk Road, yeah.